Right.
Ever had like that total nightmare scenario, right? Where your company's whole software system crashes and everything just grinds to a halt, and then it turns out it's like your vendor's fault, but when you go to check the contract, it's so vague, there's nothing you can do about it.
Oh, it's the worst.
I know, right? Well, today we're going to try to like arm you with the knowledge to prevent that whole situation from ever happening.
We are going to bulletproof those contracts.
Yes. So we're diving deep into FDA-regulated IT contracts and SLAs. And to help us navigate this, we've got the amazing insights of Carolyn Troiano, who has over 40 years of experience in this field.
Yeah, she's helped a ton of companies avoid some really, costly mistakes.
Oh, I bet.
And she's got some really fascinating points. She emphasizes that whether you're a tech expert or, maybe you're just starting out in an FDA-regulated industry, these agreements, they impact everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking, potential compliance violations, operational hiccups. You could even have financial losses, all because of, overlooked details in a contract.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's crazy how one little sentence can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the first things Carolyn really stresses is that, contracts and SLAs, they're more than just, paperwork, right?
Totally.
They're the bedrock of accountability. They're the roadmap to making sure that your vendor delivers what you need.
Exactly. Not just what they, maybe just verbally promised. And, one thing she points out that I thought was super interesting is that it's a really common pitfall to leave these super crucial contracts solely to the purchasing department.
Well, yeah, I mean, at first glance, you think, oh, purchasing handles contracts, right? So that makes sense.
Right.
What's wrong with that?
Well, think about it this way. Your IT and compliance teams, they live and breathe your systems right. And your data and all the specific FDA regulations that you have to follow.
Oh, yeah, that's their whole world.
Exactly. And without their input, a contract might miss some really essential technical and regulatory nuances. And those can turn into massive headaches later on.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like building a house, right? You wouldn't let the purchasing department just design the whole thing without any input from the architects and engineers.
Right. You need that specialized knowledge.
Exactly. And Carolyn, she really stresses that creating a bulletproof IT vendor agreement, it starts with a crystal clear understanding of your needs and, and the potential risks that are out there.
Right. So before you even start thinking about negotiating, you have to ask yourself, what certifications should your vendor absolutely have?
Yes, 100%.
And one that she highlights specifically is SOC 2, right?
Yes.
Which is crucial for cybersecurity compliance, especially these days.
Huge. Yeah, it's like checking the credentials of a contractor. You want to make sure they're qualified and trustworthy before you, let them anywhere near your house.
Or your data.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is almost more important these days.
Pretty much.
So, okay, so we've got this blueprint of our IT needs, the certifications we need to look for. But now comes the negotiation process, right? And I always picture it as this really tense standoff, with contracts flying across the table.
Oh, yeah.
But
that's not really how Carolyn sees it.
No.
No, she actually advocates for a much more strategic and balanced approach.
Okay.
It's about being assertive in protecting your company's interests, but also fostering a collaborative relationship with your vendor.
So it's not a battle, it's a partnership.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do you find that balance between being firm and being collaborative?
That's a great question. She suggests mapping out a clear negotiation plan beforehand. So, identify your must-haves, the things that are, nice to haves, and then your absolute deal breakers. And then when you're actually in the negotiations, you can use well-defined penalty clauses for, if there is any non-compliance.
Okay, so it's adding some teeth to that agreement.
Exactly.
So it's hey, we're in this together, but there are going to be consequences if you don't hold up your end of the bargain.
Yeah. And another tip that she gives is to, really don't skip the due diligence.
Okay.
Request references and check the vendor's past performance before you, sign anything.
So it's asking for recommendations before you hire a contractor.
Precisely. You want to hear firsthand about their reliability and the quality of their work.
Okay. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now I think it's time to bust some FDA compliance myths, because I feel there are a lot of misconceptions floating around out there.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot.
So what's the first one that Carolyn tackles?
This one was a huge eye-opener for me.
Okay.
She points out that the FDA doesn't actually, dictate a specific validation process.
Wait, really? So there's no, one-size-fits-all checklist we have to follow?
Nope.
Wow, okay.
Carolyn, she emphasizes that what the FDA wants to see is a documented risk-based approach that's specifically tailored to your company's, systems and processes.
So it's about understanding your unique risks and creating a validation strategy that makes sense for your situation,
Yeah.
rather than just like blindly following some generic checklist.
Exactly. It's about thinking critically and demonstrating that you have like a thorough understanding of your own needs and vulnerabilities.
Okay, that makes so much more sense, and it's kind of empowering too, right?
I think so.
What other myths does Carolyn debunk?
Okay, so another common one is that you don't need to validate off-the-shelf software.
Oh yeah, I've definitely heard that one.
People assume that if the vendor's already validated it, then they're good to go.
But that's not the case.
Not necessarily.
Why is that? I mean,
Yeah.
doesn't the vendor's validation cover everything?
Well, here's the thing. The vendor, they might have tested the software generally, but they haven't tested it in your specific environment, with your data and for your unique intended use.
Right.
So Carolyn warns that skipping this step can actually lead to major compliance issues down the line.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. No cutting corners when it comes to validation, even if the software seems like it's pre-validated.
Right.
We need to make sure it works the way WE need it to work in our environment.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about the big one. Cloud computing. It's everywhere these days, but is it like a friend or a foe for FDA-regulated companies?
Well, Carolyn, she acknowledges both the unique challenges and opportunities that come with cloud-based systems, but she really stresses the need to vet those cloud vendors carefully.
Okay, so going beyond just like the basic service offerings, right?
Yes, 100%.
What specific aspects should we be like scrutinizing?
Okay, so one detail that often gets overlooked is the location of the cloud vendor's servers.
Whoa, I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Why does the server location matter? I mean, isn't the cloud just out there,
Well, different countries have different data privacy and security laws.
Right.
And you need to make sure that your data is being stored and handled in a way that complies with all those relevant regulations.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like choosing where to build your house. You'd consider the local building codes and zoning regulations, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so what else should we be looking for when we're choosing a cloud vendor?
Carolyn emphasizes the importance of their commitment to data integrity.
Yeah?
You want to see really robust security measures in place and a proven track record of them actually protecting their clients' data.
Okay, so we've chosen our vendor carefully. We've negotiated this rock solid contracts.
Yeah.
And SLA, are we done? Can we just kick back and relax?
Not quite.
How's that
Remember, this is a partnership, right? It's not just a one-time transaction.
Right.
So Carolyn, she really emphasizes the importance of proactive monitoring. You don't want to just assume everything's fine.
Right.
You need to keep tabs on your vendor's performance throughout the whole relationship.
So it's not a set it and forget it situation.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. But what's the best way to stay on top of things? How can we actively engage with our vendors and make sure they're actually holding up their end of the bargain?
Well, Carolyn, she's a big fan of routine vendor audits.
Okay.
These can help you track SLA compliance and, catch any potential security incidents before they snowball into something huge.
Right.
And there are some really great third-party tools out there that can help with, this kind of monitoring.
It's like having a home security system that alerts you to any suspicious activity.
Yeah.
You want to know right away if there's a problem so you can address it quickly.
Exactly.
Are there any other red flags that Carolyn mentions to watch out for?
Yeah, she mentions one that can be a real warning sign.
Okay.
Vendors who are reluctant to share their security certifications or audit reports. That kind of secrecy can signal some deeper problems lurking beneath the surface.
It's like a contractor refusing to show you their license or proof of insurance.
Exactly.
Definitely a cause for concern.
Yeah.
So speaking of keeping things organized earlier,
Sure.
Carolyn was talking about the importance of having these IT vendor management policies in place.
Right.
Why are those so crucial?
Well, think of them as the ground rules for all your vendor relationships.
Nah.
It's about setting clear expectations and guidelines for everything from the initial selection process all the way to ongoing monitoring. Having those policies in place can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
So it's not just about individual contracts. It's about having a consistent framework for managing all those vendor relationships.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are some of the key elements that Carolyn suggests, including in these policies?
Well, first and foremost, you need to clearly state the purpose of the policy, right? To protect your company's information and manage the risks that come with working with, third-party vendors. It's laying out the mission statement for your whole approach to vendor management.
Okay. So everyone needs to be on the same page about why these policies exist in the first place.
Right. You want to like define key terms.
Okay.
Like what exactly constitutes a third-party IT vendor.
Right.
So there's no ambiguity.
So everyone's using the same language.
Exactly. And you'll also want clear guidelines around compliance. How will you ensure that vendors are actually adhering to all those relevant regulations like IPA for healthcare data or a GDPR for data privacy in the EU?
So it's like spelling out the consequences for breaking the rules.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what's expected of them.
Exactly. And then in terms of like the actual nuts and bolts of managing those relationships,
Right.
Carolyn recommends outlining like a really structured approach that covers, everything from that initial due diligence to the ongoing oversight. This might include things like, a vendor risk rating system, regular audits, detailed documentation of all your vendor interactions.
So it's all about staying organized and having a system in place for tracking those relationships.
Precisely.
Kind of like keeping a detailed logbook for your car maintenance.
Exactly. And don't forget about legal review standards.
Okay.
Carolyn emphasizes the importance of having all contracts and SLAs reviewed by legal experts.
Right.
To make sure they're airtight and protect your company's interests.
It's like having a lawyer look over a lease agreement before you sign it. You want to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed.
Exactly. So now Carolyn also gets into some specific contract elements that are like extra crucial for those FDA-regulated IT systems.
Okay, what are some of those?
Well, service level metrics are a big one. Things like response times and uptime guarantees are super important for ensuring that your systems are running, smoothly and reliably.
Okay, it's like setting clear expectations for your internet provider. If the internet goes down, how quickly will they respond?
Exactly. These things need to be spelled out to avoid any surprises or disruptions.
Right.
And then regulatory compliance clauses are essential, especially those that address specific FDA regulations. For example, 21 CFR Part 11, which covers electronic records and signatures. That's a big one for a lot of companies in this space.
So it's about making sure those contracts have all the necessary safeguards in place to keep you compliant with all those ever-evolving FDA regulations.
Precisely. Now, Carolyn also provides some additional insights that are specifically geared towards the ever-changing world of cloud computing.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting. Cloud computing seems to change so quickly.
It really does.
What do we need to know to keep up?
Well, data segregation is a big one, especially in those multi-tenant cloud environments where multiple clients are sharing the same infrastructure. You want to make sure that your data is securely walled off from everyone else's.
Right, it's like living in an apartment building. You want to make sure your unit is secure and your belongings are separate from your neighbors.
Exactly. You don't want any mix-ups or accidental data leaks.
Right.
Another thing to watch out for is vendors who claim that their software is FDA approved.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that FDA approved sounds impressive, but is it always legitimate?
It can be misleading.
Okay.
The FDA doesn't actually approve software in that way, so always dig deeper and don't take those claims at face value.
Good to know. What about system updates and patches? How do those work in a cloud environment?
That's a great question. You'll want to clarify how the vendor handles those updates and patches and make sure you have some control over the process. The last thing you want is like a surprise update that disrupts your operations or creates some unexpected compliance issues.
Right. It's like making sure your landlord gives you proper notice before doing any major renovations or repairs in your building.
Exactly. You don't want to be caught off guard.
Right.
And finally, don't underestimate the importance of vendor expertise in the life sciences industry.
Okay.
Do they truly understand the unique regulations and requirements of this sector? Do they have like a dedicated team with experience working with FDA-regulated companies?
It's like choosing a contractor who specializes in historic renovations. If you're living in a centuries-old house, you don't want someone who only knows how to work with modern buildings.
Perfect analogy.
You need that specialized knowledge.
Exactly. And speaking of specialized knowledge, vendor audits are such a valuable tool.
Okay.
They give you a chance to really assess the vendor's quality management system, their software development practices, and their overall commitment to compliance.
It's like having a home inspector come in and evaluate your potential apartment before you sign the lease.
Exactly.
You want to make sure everything's up to code and there are no hidden problems.
Precisely. And remember, audits aren't about punishing vendors.
Right.
They're about building stronger relationships based on transparency, trust, and a shared commitment to quality and compliance.
So it's about working together with your vendor to create a smooth, efficient, and compliant partnership.
Exactly.
Teamwork makes the dream work right.
Absolutely. Now, Carolyn gets into some very specific guidance on conducting those effective vendor audits, particularly in a cloud computing environment.
Okay, let's get tactical. What are her top recommendations?
Well, a vendor questionnaire is a great starting point.
Okay.
Use it to gather information about the vendor's policies, procedures, certifications. It's like a pre-screening process to make sure they meet your basic requirements before you dive any deeper.
So it's a quick way to weed out any obvious deal breakers.
Exactly.
What comes next?
Take a close look at their software development approach. How do they develop, test, and release their software? Are they using a robust and documented methodology? You want to make sure they have a solid process in place, not just some haphazard approach.
Makes sense. It's like asking a mechanic how they diagnose and repair cars.
Yeah.
You want to hear about a systematic process, not just, oh, I usually just tinker around until I figure it out.
Exactly. You also want to review their policies, procedures, and practices related to security and data integrity. Are they taking all the necessary steps to protect your data? Do they have a clear plan for handling security incidents?
It's like asking your building manager about their security measures. Do they have working locks on all the doors? Is there a security system in place?
Right. You want to make sure your data is as safe as your physical belongings.
Right. And don't forget about certifications.
Yes.
Verify that the vendor holds any relevant certifications such as SOC 2 for security compliance or ISO 27001 for information security management systems.
Very important.
It's like checking if a contractor is licensed and insured. It adds a layer of credibility and reassurance.
Exactly.
So we've done our questionnaire, we've evaluated their approach, we've reviewed their policies, we've checked their certifications. What's next?
Carolyn recommends having a direct conversation with the vendor.
Okay.
This is your opportunity to clarify any questions or concerns you have and to just get a better sense of their overall commitment to quality and compliance. Open communication is key in any good partnership.
It's like sitting down with your landlord to discuss any expectations or concerns you have. That open dialogue can prevent a lot of misunderstandings down the road.
Right.
What about employee qualifications and training? How do those factor into the audit process?
That's a great point. You want to make sure that their employees have the necessary expertise to support your systems and meet those compliance requirements.
Right.
It's like asking your building manager about the qualifications of their maintenance staff. Do they have the skills and experience to handle any repairs that might come up?
So it's not just about the company's policies and procedures. It's also about the people who are actually doing the work.
Yes, and of course we can't forget about references.
Oh, yeah, right. References.
Talking to other clients who have actually worked with the vendor can give you such valuable insights.
It's like getting reviews from other tenants before you move into a new building.
Exactly. Now, once you've gathered all this information, summarize your findings in a report, including any areas of concern or recommendations for improvement.
Okay.
And then this report can be shared with the vendor and used to guide your future interactions and decisions.
So it's like giving your landlord a list of any issues you found during your inspection.
Exactly.
It gives them a chance to address those concerns and improve their service.
Right.
So what happens after that report is delivered? What are the potential outcomes of this whole audit process?
Well, there are a few possibilities. You might decide to use the vendor unconditionally if they meet all your requirements and they have a solid track record. Or you might use them conditionally, requiring them to address specific concerns or implement certain improvements before you sign a contract.
So it's like deciding whether to sign that lease or not. If the apartment meets your needs and the landlord addresses any concerns, you're good to go.
Right.
But if there are major issues or the landlord isn't willing to make changes, you might walk away.
Exactly what other outcomes are possible.
Yeah, what else could happen?
Well, you might agree to re-examine the vendor at a later date if you're not quite ready to commit, or if you want to see how they handle, certain concerns.
Okay.
Or you might choose to just avoid working with that vendor altogether if they pose a significant risk, or they simply don't meet your basic requirements.
Right. It's like deciding to keep looking for a different apartment if the one you saw just wasn't the right fit.
Exactly. You move on to the next option and keep searching until you find the right one.
Okay.
Now, it's important to remember that the goal of vendor audits isn't to punish vendors. It's about establishing a collaborative relationship based on transparency, trust, and a shared commitment to quality and compliance.
So it's about creating a win-win situation where both parties feel good about the partnership and they can work together effectively.
Exactly. It sounds like Carolyn really emphasizes the importance of that collaborative approach.
She does.
And she reminds us that by taking a proactive and collaborative approach to IT vendor management, we can mitigate risks, ensure compliance, and ultimately drive innovation and success in our FDA-regulated businesses.
That's inspiring. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about building a strong foundation for success.
Exactly.
And speaking of strong foundations, Carolyn also spent some time unpacking data integrity with all this talk about cloud computing and data breaches. It seems like data integrity is more important now than ever, especially for FDA-regulated industries.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about patient safety, product quality, the reliability of clinical trials. It all comes down to having data you can really trust.
The stakes are high. And thankfully, Carolyn doesn't just say data integrity is important. She actually breaks down what the FDA expects in a way that's like really clear and actually actionable.
Right.
She reminds us of the LCOA plus principles.
Yes.
Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, or a true, copy, accurate, complete, consistent, enduring, and available.
It's a mouthful, I know.
It is.
But each of those principles is like a safeguard for your data.
Okay, so let's unpack those a little bit. What does each of those principles actually mean in practice?
Okay, so let's start with attributable. This just means knowing who created a data record and when they created it.
Okay.
It's about establishing clear accountability for every single piece of data.
So no more like mysterious data floating around with no one taking ownership.
Right, exactly.
What about legible?
This one's pretty straightforward. The data needs to be readable and understandable both by humans and by computer systems.
Makes sense. It's like making sure your handwriting is clear enough for anyone to read.
Right.
Okay, what about contemporaneous? I always struggle to remember what that one means.
Yeah, it means recording the data at the time it's generated, not later.
Okay.
So think of it like taking notes during a meeting instead of trying to remember everything afterward.
Got it. So it's about capturing that information accurately, and in real time, you don't have to rely on your memory.
Right.
Okay, what about original or true copy?
This is all about preserving the integrity of that original data. So you want to have the original record or like a certified copy that can be verified and is tamper-proof.
So it's like keeping important documents in a safe place where they can't be altered or damaged.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the first four: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original. Now, what about the plus part of ALCO plus?
Those are the additional safeguards that ensure your data is not only trustworthy but also usable.
Okay.
So accurate means the data is correct and free from errors. Complete means you have all the necessary information. No gaps.
Okay.
Consistent means the data is recorded in the same way every time, so it's easy to like compare and analyze.
Okay, so it sounds like the plus of principles are all about removing ambiguity and making sure that your data is reliable.
Exactly.
Okay, what about enduring?
That means preserving the data over time, even as technology changes or systems are upgraded.
Right.
It's like archiving important documents so you can still access them years later.
That's crucial. We need to make sure we can still use our data even as technology evolves.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, what does available mean in this context?
Available means making sure that authorized users can access the data when they need it.
Right. Data is only useful if people can actually access it and use it.
Exactly.
Okay. I think I have a much better grasp of those LCOA plus principles now. But how do we make sure that our vendors are actually following them?
Carolyn recommends incorporating those principles directly into your contracts and SLAs with vendors.
Okay.
This might involve requiring vendors to actually demonstrate their adherence to LCOA plus through, documentation audits or other means.
So it's not just about hoping they'll do the right thing. We're making it like a contractual obligation.
Right. Exactly.
What are some examples of language we could use to hold them accountable?
You could include clauses requiring vendors to have robust data validation processes, secure data storage systems, detailed audit trails. You might also specify the format and frequency of data backups and define clear procedures for data recovery if there's like a system failure.
So it's like having a legally binding agreement that your landlord will install smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in your apartment.
Exactly.
You're not just hoping they'll do it. You're making it a requirement.
Right. And remember, data integrity isn't solely the vendor's responsibility. It's a shared responsibility between your company and the vendor.
Right.
Both sides play a crucial role in creating a data environment that's secure, reliable, and compliant.
It's a team effort.
It is.
And speaking of teams, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered so much ground today. The importance of contracts and SLAs, navigating the world of cloud computing, and the crucial role of data integrity.
We have, and I hope you feel empowered to approach those vendor relationships with confidence and a really proactive mindset.
I know I do. Carolyn Troiano has given us so much information and practical advice. It's like we've been given this roadmap. for this complex landscape of vendor agreements.
She really has. And if you're looking for an even deeper dive into this topic, be sure to check out the full webinar recording. It's available through Amorit Education. It's packed with even more insights and guidance that can help you build these really strong, successful, and compliant partnerships.
That's great advice. We'll be sure to include a link to the webinar in the show notes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.